In 1974, the US made a secret deal in the Saudi desert that made the entire world depend on the dollar. That deal just expired, and what comes next will change the price of everything you own. In 1971, Richard Nixon went on national television and said one word that would quietly destroy the savings of millions of people over the next 50 years. Temporarily. He said the US would temporarily stop backing the dollar with gold. That was 54 years ago. The dollar never went back. And right now, in 2025, the consequences of that single word are finally catching up to all of us. There's an academic named Jang who went viral recently, and not for the usual reasons. He didn't go viral for a hot take. He went viral because he was right. He predicted Trump's return to power. He predicted the war in the Middle East escalating. He predicted Russia and China getting closer. He said all of this years before it happened, and he recorded it on camera. Now here's the thing. Jang didn't use a crystal ball. He didn't read horoscopes. He used two tools that economists use every single day, but never apply to the big picture. The first tool, psychohistory. The idea, first imagined by sci-fi writer Isaac Asimov, that if you have enough data about how large groups of people have behaved in the past, you can mathematically calculate how they'll behave in the future. Individual people are unpredictable, but empires follow a script. The second tool, game theory. Forget morality. Forget what politicians say on camera. Game theory asks one cold, simple question. What is the most profitable move for this player right now? If the answer is war, there will be war. If the answer is printing trillions of dollars, the printer turns on. That's all Jang did. He watched powerful people do what powerful people always do, and he wrote down where it leads. So let's follow that same logic and look at what's actually happening to the dollar. To understand what's happening today, you need to go back to that Sunday night in 1971. Before Nixon's speech, the dollar had a hard limit. For every dollar printed, there was an equivalent amount of gold sitting in the Federal Reserve. The government couldn't print infinite money because there was only so much gold. But Nixon had a problem. He had a war in Vietnam that was draining the treasury. He had massive social programs to fund, and other countries, France, Germany, were starting to notice that America was spending more than it had, and they were lining up to trade their dollars back for gold. So Nixon did what every government does when the math doesn't work out. He changed the math. He told the world, the dollar is no longer backed by gold. It's backed by trust in the United States government. Now, trust is a fine thing between friends. But it doesn't pay for aircraft carriers. The US needed a way to force the world to keep using dollars, and 3 years later, they found one. In 1974, the US Secretary of State flew to Saudi Arabia and made a deal so important and so rarely talked about that most Americans have no idea it exists. The deal was simple. America would give Saudi Arabia something priceless: military protection, the best weapons, a guarantee that no one would ever overthrow the royal family. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would do two things. First, they would only sell their oil in US dollars, and second, any extra profit they made from that oil, they'd reinvest it in US Treasury bonds. Think about what this meant. Every country on Earth needs oil to run. Factories, trucks, power plants, all of it runs on oil. And now, if you wanted to buy oil, you had to first buy dollars. So countries around the world had to hold dollars. They had to keep buying dollars. Demand for the dollar was locked in, not because people trusted America, but because they needed oil. This is the petrodollar system, and for 50 years it allowed the United States to do something no other country in history could do: print money, export the inflation to the rest of the world, and receive real goods, oil, electronics, cars, in exchange for paper. That deal expired in 2024. The Saudis didn't renew it. They're now accepting Chinese yuan for oil. The foundation just cracked. Here's where the US made a fatal mistake. For decades, the dollar wasn't just a currency. It was a weapon. If you didn't cooperate with Washington, the US could cut you off from the global financial system. No dollars, no trade, economic strangulation. And for a long time, it worked. But in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the US did something that shocked every central banker on Earth. They froze over $300 billion in Russian reserves, money that Russia had saved and deposited in Western banks. Then they kicked Russia out of SWIFT, the global payment system. Now, if you were the finance minister of China, watching this happen, what would you think? If I ever disagree with Washington, they can take my money. And if you were India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, same thought. The message the US intended to send was, don't mess with us. The message the world actually received was, don't trust us with your money. And quietly, very quietly, central banks around the world started doing something they hadn't done in decades. They started buying gold. Not stocks, not treasury bonds, gold. Because gold has one property that no dollar can match. No government can freeze it, print it, or sanction it. While the US was spending hundreds of billions of dollars sending weapons to Ukraine, something else was happening in the background that most American news channels barely mentioned. The BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, was quietly becoming something much bigger than a group of emerging markets. Today, BRICS controls more than half of the world's population, and more importantly, they control the commodities, the oil, the gas, the uranium, the food. Think about that. The countries that grow the food, pump the oil, and mine the metals that run modern civilization, they're now building an alternative financial system, one that doesn't run through New York or Washington, one that doesn't use the dollar. And Jang's argument, based purely on game theory, is that Trump's tariff strategy is making this faster. Every country the US sanctions or tariffs has one logical move: get closer to BRICS. Get out of the dollar system before the system gets weaponized against you too. The US is accidentally pushing the world into the arms of the alternative it feared most. Now let's talk about the number that changes everything: $315 trillion. That is the total amount of debt in the global financial system right now. Not just US debt, global debt. Your brain can't process that number. Nobody's can. Here's some context. The entire planet, every country, every factory, every farm, every business, produces about $105 trillion in goods and services every year. The debt is 3 times the entire annual output of human civilization. It cannot be paid back. The math is physically impossible. Even Jang, who is careful with his words, says this isn't pessimism, it's arithmetic. And here's what always happens when empires can't pay their debts. They print money. They inflate their currency. They tax their citizens harder, and if that's not enough, they find an external enemy and go to war, because war creates demand, justifies printing, and gives people someone else to blame for the rising prices. The inflation you feel at the grocery store right now, it's not an accident. It's not bad luck. It's the bill arriving for decades of printing paper and calling it prosperity. So what happens when the dollar system collapses? What do governments offer you next? They'll offer you a solution. They always do. The solution already has a name: CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency. Now, on the surface, this sounds like convenience. Digital money, fast transactions, no cash to carry. Fine. But here's the difference between the money in your bank account today and a CBDC. The money in your account today, you control it. You decide where it goes, when it moves, and what you buy with it. A CBDC is programmable money, which means a bureaucrat at the central bank can decide, not you, what that money is allowed to do. They can set an expiration date, spend it in 30 days, or it disappears. They can geofence it. Your money only works within 5 miles of your home. They can restrict categories. You've reached your carbon quota this month, so no more red meat purchases allowed. And if you protest the government, they don't need to send police to your door. They just press a button and you stop existing financially. This isn't science fiction. In 2022, the Canadian government froze the bank accounts of truckers who were peacefully protesting, without a court order. No trial, no due process, just account frozen. That was with regular banking technology. Imagine what becomes possible when money is fully programmable. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every generation thinks the empire will last forever. The Romans thought it, the British thought it, and most Americans today don't spend a lot of time thinking about what happens if the dollar stops being the world's reserve currency. But history doesn't care what we think, it just moves. The question isn't whether this transition happens. Jang would say the question is simply, where is your wealth when the music stops? Central banks are answering that question with gold. Some individuals are answering it with Bitcoin, a system with no government, no printer, a hard limit of 21 million coins, and no way to freeze or confiscate it without the owner's private key. Both are imperfect answers, but they're real answers. Unlike holding paper printed by a government that owes 3 times what the whole world earns in a year, the dollar isn't going to collapse overnight. Empires don't fall in a day, but they do fall. And the signs: the petrodollar expiring, central banks buying gold, BRICS expanding, CBDC trials already running, aren't conspiracy theories. They're policy documents. They're official agreements. They're things already happening in public that most people aren't watching. You don't have to believe any prophecy to see what's coming. You just have to read the room. If this video changed the way you see your money, share it with someone who still thinks the dollar is untouchable. It might be the most important thing you share this year.